like millions of people are in this hall. So I am honored to be a part of this series. It's a series that is near and dear to my heart. And what that series is racial equity. And Brian is one of my partners in crime, in that I chaired the Diversity Inclusion Commission, as you all know, for Centers for Spiritual Living. And we took some very bold steps this year. A very bold step was inviting Brian to be. But we tethered him. We did tether him. He worked with a woman by the name of Champion Fleming. And I'm so grateful to Brian and to Champion because the subject was around racial equity. And in order to really achieve that and heal that, you have to first acknowledge it. And so a part of the work that Brian and Champion did was they educated the community on some concepts that people tend not to want to talk about. Because it's uncomfortable. It creates some discomfort. But what I also know is in that discomfort, that's where we grow. That's where the opportunities are. The opportunities to stand in our truth. And you all have some very, very big shoes to fill in that you decided you were going to name your center Oneness. And so what that means is not just espousing and paying lip service, but you have to live it. You have to be it. You have to breathe it. You have to believe it. Because we're going to be watching you. So one of the things that Brian asked me to do was to talk from a personal perspective around racial inequity and how that has landed for me or impacted me throughout my life and my journey. And so the title of my talk is Using the Science of Mind to Move from Marginalization to Empowerment. And so, as was mentioned, this is my life's work, and the way that I affect change in many situations is through education. So, you're no different. I'm going to educate you. Meaning that there's some terminology that I think that we ought to acquaint ourselves with, and then also I want to give you the foundational principle and perspective from which I'm going to weave my story. So, I hope, wrong slide, but we'll work with it. This is, I've got multiple slides on that particular thumb drive. This is from a webinar that I created while Brian was working on From Bystander to Ally, and that audience primarily being people who are not of color. I was simultaneously working with people who are of color so that we could heal, so that we could continue to do our work. So the term marginalization, it's the process of pushing a particular group or groups of people to the edge or outer margins of society by not allowing them an active voice, identity, or place in it. So through both direct and indirect processes, marginalized groups may be relegated to a subordinate position or made to feel as if they are less important than those who hold more power or privilege in that society. So I'm going to put this on blank now. And I'm doing it. I'm doing everything you told me to do. There we go. Because that's not the right slide presentation. The definition still works because that's what I was going to use. But what I wanted to share with you all is the foundational piece. that's going to anchor all this. And it comes from our beloved Ernest Holmes. How do I get that to stay off?
I'll take care of it.
Thank you. So Ernest Holmes talks about us having choice and free will, does he not?
Yes.
He talks about there's a power and there's a presence back of every single thing, and we have access to that, does he not?
Yes.
He also taught us the science of mind, and what that means is that in any moment we get to choose our reality. We get to choose our responses. And so it's from that place that I share with you choices that I've made in my life, being a person of color in this racialized society called the United States of America. So I want you all to just imagine a beautiful black stone. It's smooth, it's got some weight to it. It's the kind of black stone that you would put in your meditation gardens because they're just so beautiful. Onyx, in fact, so there's just natural sheen to it. You got that mental equivalent? Okay. Now let's take that stone and let's put it in a place whereby water drips on it. And water drips on it every day, every hour, every minute, every second. What happens to that stone? Over time, and in my case, 6 decades, it can leave an indelible impression in that stone. It can even hollow out spaces in that stone. Well, that's what micro-inequities, microaggressions do to people who are under the consistent drip of that faucet. So there are 2 choices that we have to make. One can be, we can fashion ourselves victims, and some people do that, and they actually wear their victimhood as a badge of honor, and they commiserate with other people who has the worst experience, and they try to one-up each other. Or they can choose otherwise. They can choose to be victors and not victims. That's what the science of mind has done for me. And when I talk to many of my colleagues, and I have one in particular who's in mind, and she said to me, this teaching literally saved my life. This woman was used to the constant drip, the insults, the slights. And she had become very, very militant. It was not serving her well in corporate America. And so she found the science of mind. So that's her story. What is my story? My story is that I too have utilized these teachings, these principles, our practices, to help me not just survive in this culture, but to thrive in this culture. So let me just share with you a couple of ways in which I'm slighted on a regular basis. I'm the principal of my firm, have been since 1990. Management Dynamics Incorporated. We do not take any special dispensation for being minority-owned or woman-owned. That was a choice. I want to compete. I am not small and I'm not disadvantaged. And so we compete. And I've had some major clients, Prudential, AT&T, locked up the telecommunications industry because I came out of that industry. Showtime, HBO, ever heard of them? Viacom, before its demise, Blockbuster. Those are just some of my clients. I relocated to the Washington, D.C. area, went through the certification process to do work with the federal government, landed 4 of the 3-letter agencies. DIA, ONIA, all the 3-letter agencies. Why did I make that choice? Because I'm not going to allow someone else to define who I am. Small, disadvantaged? No. That's not my truth. What Ernest Holmes said to a congregation in Los Angeles years and years ago when they were subjected to, I say, pretty macro inequity. This is the Third Church of Religious Science. You may have heard the story. They had a large African-American congregation, thriving community. Science of Mind magazine used to publish all of the centers in their magazine. Well, when they learned that this was primarily an African-American congregation, they took them out of the major listing and stuck them in the back. Just like back of the bus. This was back of the magazine. So they had a spiritual leader who was also very self-empowered, and he took it upon himself to have a conversation with Mr. Holmes. And Ernest corrected that situation. And not only did he right that wrong, he showed up at that church. And this is what he said. And this is what I use every time a modicum of self-doubt might start to attempt to work its way into my consciousness. Whoever you are, wherever you are, remember you are a divine idea in the mind of God. Breathe that in. Now, I've been in the margins because of my race, something over which I have no control. Born black, live black. I venture a guess, I might even die black. But what I do with that has everything to do with my consciousness. We create our realities, do we not?
Yes.
So I choose to think on that quote whenever life comes at me hard. And it happens. Not just in the world, but also within centers for spiritual living. So let me give you a couple of examples. One of how it happens in the world, and then one how it happens within our organization. So I land all these big accounts, no special set aside, and if you write a really good proposal, I've learned how to do that. You write really good proposals, you're invited into the next stage. What's the next stage? You actually get to do a presentation and sell the potential client on your firm. So I usually take a colleague with me because we balance each other really, really well. So this has not happened just once. It's probably happened on 10 occasions. We will arrive at the client's facility. And I intentionally don't put pictures in my information because I don't want to be discounted based on what somebody sees without them making an informed decision to go with us or not go with us. So we show up at the client's office and they greet us, and they're usually very gracious, and they coffee and tea and all that. So invariably, my colleague, who happens to be very tall, very white, and very handsome, they will walk up to him. Give me your hand, Tom. Give me your hand. Mr. Synegal. So nice to see you. And so then we just kind of smile. He looks at me, I look at him, because we have our little routine now for addressing that. And sometimes he even gets elevated to Dr. Synegal. And so he'll say something like, coffee, cream, 2 sugars, and I'll nod, and he'll go off, and then people are kind of looking. And so then my response is, as soon as my assistant returns, then we can begin the meeting. And so they stand there. So it's really okay. I'm used to it. And I said, you know what? You just reinforce the fact that you need our services. Oh, and I am a strategist. Look, it's going to start with you. So as I said, we just kind of joke about it. But when we're back in a cab or something on the way to the airport, he'll say to me, Michele, how do you do it? And I said, what? And he said, this has happened to us many, many, many times. You're always slated. How do you do it? And I say, because, that's an experience. But I know the absolute truth. And as long as I know the truth, I'm empowered, and joke's on you. So I decided, after leaving Spiritual Empowerment Center and candidating for a couple of pulpits, which I didn't get, one of them being Columbia. Oh, you owe me. But when I didn't get 2 pulpits and I was qualified, and in many instances overqualified, compared to my neophyte colleague who admitted last week that he was underqualified. But that's an example, you all, of unconscious racial bias. Qualifications didn't matter. People go with what's comfortable. People go with what they perceive is going to be a good fit, even though it may not be in their best interest. But now you all have Brian. God bless you. And what do I have? I have the entire world. So I have moved from the margin being small little center in Baltimore, Maryland, that got no attention, no recognition, to being a global leader in this movement. And that doesn't come without its micro inequities and microaggressions, and now I'm in the doggone fishbowl. Everything that is done is scrutinized. Overly scrutinized. Had an article pulled supposed to run this month in the Science of Mind magazine because I told the truth. And sometimes folks don't like the truth. But if you don't acknowledge the truth, how are you going to heal? How are you going to grow? How are you going to affect change where change needs affecting? I have the opportunity to do a do-over, but that's not who I am. To compromise? So I made the technical changes that needed to be made, but the content remained the same. So it didn't run. It didn't run. And so my question, I had a follow-up meeting, was, is this customary for this council to review every article before it goes to print? Yeah. See, that's an example of an inequity. That is what your spiritual leader is endeavoring to mitigate against. And you would think that we are enlightened spiritual beings and that we are not capable of those slights. But we just be human too. And what that means is being acculturated in this society, a very racialized society, it's going to rub off. Right? So realized was that what is mine to do is no longer to work in an individual center, but to affect change at every level within this organization. Our leadership is more diverse than it's ever been. We were asleep at the wheel last year, so we didn't have any candidates of color, but we're on it this year. The awards committees. There are some other places that we still need to penetrate to make sure there is equity. Giving doctorates to folks in this movement who are of color. It hasn't happened since, I believe, Reverend Oliver, my spiritual leader, and that was many, many years ago. So see, there's still places and spaces and opportunities for us to stand in our truth and to live these values that we espouse of diversity, inclusion, and oneness. So you see, my next yet to be was to be that reminder, was to be in a place where I could educate within my own spiritual community. I had been asked to chair this commission many times. No, I do that 5 days a week. I just want to be served. I just want to be fed. I just want, you know. But then the commission's existence was very, very precarious. There was discussion about disbanding the commission. And I heard about it. And I stepped up. Sometimes leaders have to step up. And I said, I will lead. And so I've been in that position now for a little over 18 months. We're thriving. We're shaking things up. We're expanding people's awareness, their conversation, and changing the narrative. Why? Because I learned that in every instance, we have a choice. We get to choose. Do we want to be a victim? Or do we want to be a victor? Do we want to be a complainer and a whiner? Or do we want to be a part of the solution? So I am a part of the solution. So from being on the margins, small center, no recognition, to being a voice of influence in this movement, because I come from a position of empowerment, and I only develop that self-concept through these teachings. I say an affirmation. We used to say it at East Bay Church of Religious Science every single Sunday, primarily. It used to be back then predominantly African-American congregation, over 5,000 members. Mega church, mega church. Our minister, Reverend Oliver, knew that what most of us experienced throughout the week. And so we would start out every Sunday, God is the only power in my life. Would you affirm that with me?
God is the only power in my life.
Nothing from without can touch the perfect life that is me now.
Nothing from without can touch the perfect life that is in me now.
Breathe that in. Now I need you all to rise. I need you to rise, literally rise. Because it was a mudra. Conditions have no power over me.